Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SPM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping our continent. Teachers across Nigeria are protesting rising school kidnappings, demanding stronger protection for students and staff as insecurity continues to disrupt learning. Will measures put in place by the government be enough to make schools safe again? Nigeria's private sector has warned against compulsory wages increase, saying many businesses are already struggling with high costs despite the 70,000 naira minimum wage. Employers argue that additional wage hikes could hurt jobs and business stability. Should wages go up faster to match living costs, or should businesses be protected from added pressure? The United States plans to reduce the number of embassies and consulates in Africa that process visa applications from nearly 50 to just 20 regional hubs as part of a broader immigration policy shift. This move could require applicants in many African countries to travel across borders for visa interviews, increasing costs and waiting times. Will this policy make the United States visa process more efficient or create new barriers for Africans seeking travel, study, and business opportunities in the United States? Joining us today for further insights is Samuel Atiku, an economic analyst. Welcome, Samuel, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on the podcast.
It's always a pleasure. We start with the first story where we see teachers across Nigeria protesting rising school kidnappings. Um, from way back, from the Chibok girls to the Dapchi boys, we've just seen incidents of kidnapping, and currently, this year, Nigeria has witnessed a lot of, attacks on schools, kidnappings, especially children and teachers. The recent case in Oyo, the case in Maiduguri, and now we are seeing teachers, protesting against such kidnappings. They are demanding that there be stronger protection for both students and staff. Um, what do you think? I mean, we've had this since the Chibok girls, we've had school targeting of vulnerable groups, because I mean, our young students have vulnerable groups, and they are in school for education, and now they are being targeted. There are a lot of parents even saying, you know what, I'm not going to send my children to school anymore because I want them to be safe. So, how can the Nigerian government, you know, protect children in schools, children and teachers, and not cause a further setback in the number of out of school kids? Because I mean, Nigeria already has an alarming rate of out of school kids. If more kids stay back home because of this crisis, what can the government do to prevent this and to ensure trust with parents to bring their kids back to school as well? And how can they stop kidnappings in school? What measures do you think the government must take to stop this menace?
I think how do I start now? It's an alarming and then an embarrassing situation. The security situation in Nigeria seems to be deteriorating, and then there seems not to be ideas, and then even if ideas are on the table in terms of implementation, there seems not to be end in sight. If you remember, I think we should need to go memory lane 2014, um, after the Chibok schoolgirls adoption. The government then in 2014, right, came up with the Safe Schools initiative. And if you look at the initiative itself, the objective is very clear. We're going to improve school security across the country through the implementation of certain things, the first thing they will do is to actually ensure that schools have perimeter fencing, right? That's the first thing. They make sure that there's security assessments of the area conducted periodically, and then maybe a coding system comes into play to ascertain where there are high security risk so that emergency response planning it's designed to respond quickly to forestall and prevent crime from being committed, not to respond after crime has been committed. So the second key thing they did there, just to reiterate, is to institute a security assessment system across the schools, the over 44,000 schools that we have in Nigeria. The third thing that was done was to institute an emergency response plan. If I remember the way the plan was designed then, so that police, the army, the security architecture of Nigeria and the infrastructure can respond rapidly to prevent schools from being soft targets of this, I would like call it this devilish, demonic terrorists. And then it's horrible that I mean, that's who they are. Then there's the community vigilante kind vigilance and coordination with security agencies also, where security lines, people can easily report what they see directly to the police and then the police act. And more importantly, if you remember, in 2014, which is almost like how many years ago, about 12 years ago, right? The teachers' leaders, right, are just now, if you look at what the teachers are asking for, it's so simple. They are only demanding that this thing be implemented. It simply means that in terms of policy initiatives that they've put on ground, it should have forestalled, it should have stopped what we're experiencing now from happening if they've been implemented. So essentially, it's not been implemented. So to your first question, I don't think it's about policy. I think the policies are there, the systems are there. The problem has always been the political will to do the appropriate thing. And then when I say appropriate thing, the political will itself comes in form of how do we fund the police? How do we recruit the police? How do we remunerate them? How do we punish them? What are the accountability system that you've built around the Nigerian policing system? It's unfortunate that this is where we are, at least to start with. Again, just to reiterate, the Safe School initiative that was implemented, that was constituted and then quickly put together as a policy directive. Back in 2014, if it has been implemented, the crisis we're seeing today will not have materialized. That's the first point. The second issue we have to pay close attention to is that schools are now closing. And just like you said, there are implications in terms of out of school children. Remember, out of school children were historically concentrated in the northeast because of the crisis. Of course, you can't send you can't send your children to school if you know definitely that their security is not guaranteed. Just imagine a vulnerable child, a 2-year-old child. How will a 2-year-old child even know there's danger around them before they start running? They don't know that. They don't have awareness of danger to that level. In fact, a 10-year-old is not aware of danger. That's unfortunate truth that we find ourselves. So the solution that you see now happening, the federal state authority are now periodically closing schools, rather than addressing the core issue. And what that means, the implication of that is one, it creates panic and fear. And then by extension, it also shows how fragile the Nigerian state is becoming. The third thing is closely look at the military and the police deployment itself. Yeah, if you look at what the federal government has done, is especially after the fallout of the Chibok girls, the federal government says they will increase the security operations in the affected area. They say they have a wider national measures that include recruiting additional police officers. They say they would deploy security personnel to vulnerable area, blah, 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 blah. If you read the policy, you'll see a whole lot of things. Now, the question is that what are we seeing now? We're seeing a situation whereby the crime is spreading rapidly like wildfire, and the capacity of the state to police its region is falling flat. Imagine, see, when there was insecurity concentrated in a unit in Nigeria, you could essentially deploy the whole army to go and mount that plate. I've always argued that Nigeria does not have the capacity to employ enough military and police officers. We do not have it. The police officers, at best 350,000, are designed to protect the politicians, the rich. And so they're not really protecting anybody. That's the point I need to make. The military, by default, they are not designed to ensure that crime does not happen. Their primary preoccupation is to respond after the fact, meaning that somebody must have been killed, somebody must have been kidnapped before they go there. And then at the end of the day, what you see them do is raid the whole place, arrest innocent people, kill some innocent people, make a whole lot of noise, make the whole place ungovernable, and leave the scene without any security being done. I'm not saying that they've not done a lot of good work, but I'm saying that they are not designed to ensure crime do not happen. And then you see a whole lot of conversation flying here and there, so that I don't take a whole lot of time around intelligence and community security measures that you're seeing. So, to your question about whether all these initiatives are enough, probably not. I will say that if you look closely, and that's one of the key states that we have always argued, that police response time to school distress call is one pillar across the world that's consistently measured. So if you go to any country, including South Africa, you look at the budget of South Africa, for instance, and despite the fact that they have high crime rate, one of the data that they collect is to compute how fast the police respond when there's a distress call from a school. The truth is, Nigeria, is that we don't even collect that data. That's not about it. That's one. Two, there's a construct around evaluating the number of high-risk schools that are assigned patrol coverage. In Nigeria today, if you look at, we have about 44,000 schools. I mean, registered schools. We have more than that, especially when you look at the informal schools in Nigeria. But we have 44,000 schools in Nigeria. I could sit down in my house and typically look at where they are located and do some mapping, and then I could actually do an heat map to tell you where the security issues are in Nigeria. Those schools that are very close to forest and all those things. If you look closely, you will discover that almost 85% of Nigerian schools are situated in very vulnerable areas. And the solution, I'm not saying we're going to move the 44,000 schools and start embedding everything in the city. And the school systems are also very fragmented in such that the schools themselves are, anyway, I mean, how many schools in Nigeria even have mass teacher? Those levels of having security. Or at best, what you get is a gate man, right? That just have a stick that is holding. And those gate men are only there to catch late comers. That's about it. So we need to begin to collect data around the high number of high risk school. And my presumption and I'll call it guesstimate, is almost about roughly about 75 to 80% of schools are in vulnerable areas. The truth is that the government of Nigeria have a zero idea where these schools are, who these schools are. In fact, just for clarity, if you go to most states in Nigeria, they don't even know how many primary healthcare centers, how many schools they have operating in their state. That's how bad things are. So how do you begin to police those states? That's the second thing. Then the third thing is to look at the frequency of school patrol. How many times do security architect, the security systems, the police cars patrol around schools to make sure that some unscrupulous, the way the military will use those words, are actually not roving around those schools? Absolutely not. We don't even have that. That's not even in the architecture of the Nigerian police. It's not even their vocabulary. If you look at the budget of the state, the budget for education, the budget of the police, you will not find anything relatively close to that. That's how to police a state. You look at the incident rates around schools, you don't even collect that data. The intelligence alerts being acted upon, you notice it, government don't even give you any intelligence report around what is going on in school. If you look at how many people have been arrested and prosecuted around schools for crime, we don't have anything. If you look at community reporting rate, how many times communities have reported incident around school, we don't have it. If you look at the emergency drills that is being done between community and the school around some of those schools, it doesn't even exist. So we run a free state. I would like call it, we run as if we are living in a wide west where everything goes. My take here is simple and straightforward. In terms of planning, we are extremely very weak. In terms of our orientation towards security, is near impossible. You can't, even when you hear government saying, oh, they want to install CCTV camera, the goal is to target the roads. They want to put it on the road so that people will not go and put criminals will not take over the road and prevent them from moving on the road. Schools are not, hospitals are not, those vulnerable areas are not even in their vocabulary. So my take here is that in terms of planning, from the planning stage to the resource allocation stage, to even the evaluation phase, down to implementation, to all those things, we failed blatantly. We failed our children. We failed completely as a country. And we need a complete change, a make down. And that's why we've said it repeatedly. Amending the Nigerian police and trying to pay them 1 billion. If you pay every single personnel in the Nigerian police 1 billion, we still have insecurity. That's the reality. It goes beyond that. We need to take about the police systems in Nigeria, the policing system in Nigeria. We need to tear everything open and then rebuild it from ground up. What we have presently were given to us by the British. I think it worked for them for over 200 years that they were in Nigeria. But now that we have been ruling ourselves for more than 50 years, we've not come to terms with the fact that we need to change and then begin to readjust the police system to begin to work for the people, the working poor, the have-not, the children, the people in the hospital, the vulnerable in society. Rather, the police system in Nigeria is designed to protect the rich, and that's why you see them carrying AK-47, uh, beating people up in places, harassing people on the way, blowing siren and doing nothing, absolutely nothing, and collecting free salary.
I totally agree with you that the Nigerian government needs to be more intentional. And you stated the political will being absent in ensuring that the policy is implemented. The policy we spoke about on, ensuring that schools are safe, which our teachers now are calling for a full implementation. So our second story where we see the Nigerian private sector are warning against further compulsory wage increase. Um, Recently, we also saw the Kwara State Governor, Abdurrahman Abdulrazak. He called on President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to approve an upward review of the Nigerians' minimum wage from 70,000 naira to 100,000 naira. He also serves as the chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum. And I think it was this kind of plea and, appeal to the president that has also sparked a response from the private sector as well to say this would affect jobs, this will affect business stability. How do you think that, wages um, can go up and match the living cost as well? And or do you think who should be the priority in this case? Should government be prioritizing businesses to ensure that they are stable and to protect them and reduce the pressure? Or do you think that or how can the government balance it? Increase minimum wage as well as protect businesses?
That's a powerful question that you've asked me. I think here I will treat this second question as a minimum wage and cost of living issue. I will start just to rationalize it by looking at again. I'll go to academic papers, research that have been done, and then I will now draw my own conclusions based on what I know, so that it doesn't seem as if I'm imposing my views. I want people to understand that it's coming from a point of view of, empirical evidence. The first thing to think about is this. In 1994, CAD and his colleagues did a research to ascertain whether increase in minimum wage leads to fall in job. What they found, not in Nigeria, I think it's in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania, they discovered and they focused on the fast food industry. They found that no employment whatsoever actually fell. So when you increase minimum wage, they found that nothing like that happened. So they concluded that it was just a myth that people throw in just to give businesses more control over workers. That's in 1994. 1994 is a long time ago. In 1999, I mean 2019, another research by Dube and his colleague, what they did is like they looked at 138 US minimum wage changes that has happened. And they found that no job was lost uh, during that period when wage were increased. But that's the US, right? So that that tells you a lot of things. They did that in the US. That same set of people, that's Dubé, in 2019 also conducted the same research in the UK. And then they discovered that the same thing, that when they raise wage and they monitor and calibrate wage, they discovered that absolutely no job was lost. Now, let's leave Dubé. In 2022, and there's a researcher that is called Dostman, right? He looked at the German economy, and then he was looking at to ascertain whether increase in minimum wage leads to reduction in employment. What he discovered that did not happen. But again, those are stable economy. I'll come to Nigeria very soon. Now, there's another person called Arastosi. Yeah, in 2019, he conducted the same study, similar study in Hungary, and they discovered that yes, small businesses had some challenges, but it did not lead to overall job loss. So initially, when it happened, they did lay off some people, but over a period of time, people were reabsorbed into the system. Although the profit of those businesses and the price of good actually did increase. So there was some impact on jobs initially, and then there was impact on price. Now, Draka came back again and said, oh, let's use this methodology that these folks used, and reapplied it and discovered that that did not happen in the UK. Now, I'm coming down to Nigeria now. In Nigeria, there's one of these scholar. He wrote about the macroeconomic effect of minimum wage in Nigeria. His name is Fola Wiyo. That's Wale Fola Wiyo. He did a report, and then he discovered in his report that there were mixed employment effects, meaning that service employment fell, but in terms of price, so service employment is that you're working in the service sector. You have two types of jobs in the world. You have the ones that you are good producing. If you're working in construction, for instance, you are in a good producing because you're producing something that is tangible that people can talk. But when you are working in the service sector, people cannot touch what you are producing. For instance, you are maybe in the call center, you're making call. So what he discovered that there was a mixed employment effect with service employment falling in some scenarios, and it warned that price increases could actually erode real income wage, meaning that there was impact in the service sector. Idaye also did something similar, and what they discovered is that they found that lower domestic output in some sector, that means the economy of some sector actually did go down when minimum wage rise up. But again, it's all because we're playing in an inflationary environment. So that I don't overbore you with all these academic findings. So where I want to go is this. The result around whether increase in minimum wage actually do impact businesses. The truth is this. Yes, it has impact. It does have impact because when you increase minimum, just imagine you operating a small shop and you're paying somebody in that shop, maybe you're paying the person 70,000 naira. All of a sudden, the minimum wage is jacked up to 100,000 naira. It doesn't mean because once they jack it up to 100,000 naira, and you're forced, because it's a minimum wage, you're forced by law to pay that money. The challenge you're having is that your sales is not improving. What happens to you? It simply means that you have to make a choice. It's either you sack someone or you reduce the hours that the person is using. Where I'm going is this. If you look closely at the way the wage structure in Nigeria is organized, it's not organized on an hourly basis. If you're entering into an employment contract in Nigeria, you are not getting paid on an hourly basis. You are confined to this monthly system. And because of that, the impact, and that's what you're seeing in the work of Olawiyo, Ideye, Bosavi, I can talk about them. You're seeing that the impact is high here. But when you go to the other economy that which are calibrated on an hourly basis, there seems not to be a direct effect because efficiency becomes the order of the day. My take here is simple, and it is a defendable thing. We need to be careful because we are in an high inflationary economy. The price of goods and services are increasing. The households are poorer, and they need money to resurrect the economy. On the other hand of things, also, The economy is not growing fast enough to be able to accommodate sharp increases in minimum wage. So when you look closely at the business part, if you're coming from the perspective of business owners, my take here is simple. That it's going to be difficult to begin to raise minimum wage. And that's why we want that the killer of time, and it's actually inflation. Any society where the inflationary rate is as high as what you have in Nigeria, you cannot do any planning, you cannot make any informed decision. That is the first point we need to do. The first solution is to ensure that the price of goods and services are not increasing arbitrarily the way they are increasing in Nigeria. That's the starting point. The second thing is that if we keep wage fixed, what we're accepting, what we are doing is like we're shifting the burden of the economy on the workers. We're saying go and die. That's essentially what you are saying. We don't care. So if we say, oh, we are not increasing minimum wage, go and die. It simply means that the person earning 100,000 naira knows that definitely by the time he pays for transportation, he pays for this, he can't survive. What do you think the person would do? The person could resort to crime, or the person is struggling, begin to borrow, and everything collapse, or begin to rain down on spending. So somebody that was sending his child to a private school before, we withdraw the child from private school. And what happens to the teacher in the private school? That teacher loses his or her job. And then you have this chain effect of, because the person is no longer earning income, he can't pay the rent, he needs to drop out. And then you have this cascading effect where the economy begins to collapse on its head. So realistically, we can't say that, oh, we should not do anything about minimum wage. We have to increase wage. On the other side of things, also for small businesses, especially those playing there, it's going to be tough on them to be able to. And that's why the solution is simple. We need to start by recalibrating how wage is compensated in Nigeria. We need to go to the hourly system and set minimum wage based on hours. So if I'm running a shop and I know I can only afford to pay 30,000, then I will target to say, okay, please come and work in my shop between maybe 2 and 3. And after 3, you can go home. I know that's where my sales is concentrated. And as economy start growing, I start expanding to say, oh, I'm going to cover 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours. And that's where efficiency of the economy comes in. And capacity utilization begins to increase. That's how to adjust things. So just to say the defensible position is actually one, we need to do something about the minimum. The wage of people are just too poor. People are just too poor to cope with the challenges they're facing in the economy on one side. Businesses also are struggling. We need to manage it. And the solution is actually to shift the way wages are set. That's one. Two, all this arbitrary taxation that we have running, especially I know in Nigeria now for SMEs, they get like a zero tax, but we all know that that's just the corporate income tax. Um, there are other, I would say, on mitigated tax that local government people will come and place on you. If you are, for instance, if you are an artisan, you are running, what do you call this thing? You are grinding pepper for people. Some people will show up, call themselves Lagos State government and harass you. And on and on. Like, we need to dismantle all those nonsense. I don't know where we got those ideas from. Those are those are very, very terrible ideas. I don't know where it came from. I don't know who introduced an institute and injected it in our policy system. We need to eliminate. In fact, I will say that the Nigerian government needs to declare the entire Nigerian road system as a very strategic military asset. Anyone found on that road trying to extort from motorists, trying to squeeze out from people, I mean, you push them and say that they actually commit a crime against the nation. It's a big financial crime, and we have a big, strong crime syndicate running the country, running the economy aground. Until we dismantle those, I'll call it parallel gray system or black system, if I'm to use that word loosely, businesses will continue to serve. So a lot of relief for businesses is needed to begin to shift this, and then a lot of policy adjustment is needed for workers also. So it's a difficult question to ask, but that's just my own thought about how to address this quagmire that we find ourselves.
I mean, it's really a quagmire. Let's move on to our final story where we're seeing the US taking kind of stricter measures in its immigration policy and reducing um hubs for visa applications from 50 to 20. Um, What do you think that this policy, the effect it would have? Is it going to make the US policy efficient, or is it just going to create barriers for Africans who are traveling abroad for travel, for study, for business opportunities as well? And how do you think that Africa as a nation can react? Or how do you think Nigeria can react? Well, what would be the best thing for us to react in this situation? Should we build our diplomatic ties with the US, or should we focus on building ourselves and the nation as well?
It's sad to say that the policy of the Donald J. Trump administration towards Africa continue to go in this direction. I've never had in the world, even during the height of the Second World War, the First World War, have not had in anywhere in the world where almost 70 countries were banned from even applying for visas into that country. It's sad to say that. Just to clarify, what we see happening in the US is actually compelling. They are trying to centralize their visa decision-making process. They want to centralize it around 20 hubs in Africa. I think that's why I think that's coming from the Rubio's State Department. The truth is that America have liberty to decide what policy better suits its economy and its people. Yeah, we could complain from now to next year. It doesn't shift anything because, again, in terms of strategic importance of Africa to the US, I don't think US see value in Africa as such. I think that's the decision. I'll call it that's the aura that we seems to be getting from the US. Just to say also, China presently have about 18 centers in Africa. And that's the China Visa Application Service Centers site itself. And if you look at it, it's in Nigeria, Luanda, I mean, it's in Kinshasa, right? Cairo, we have Alexandria, you have Addis Ababa and Accra in Nairobi, you have in Antananarivo, you have in Abuja, you have in Lagos, you have in Yaoundé, you have in Banjul, in Dakar, in Cape Town, in Durban, in in Joburg, yeah, and then you have in Kampala. That's where the focus of the Chinese visa processing centers are. Now, aside from that, the Chinese government have about 53 embassies in Africa. Now, just to clarify, a visa application center is just a center where decisions is made about people's visa. And so you could always go to any of the 53 embassies in Africa and make your application, but the decision about your application will be made in those 18 visa centers. It's almost even the decision around the UK visa application, I think it's made in the UK, depending on the visa center. Now, the key question is this. I think the question you're asking is that what the US have done is to reduce from 50 to 20 ops for visa processing. That's the way it comes to me, and that's my interpretation of this policy. We need to be careful not to assume that it means that you can only go to those 20 ops for visa application, meaning you have to travel to those ops. Now, where the US system is completely different from the Chinese system is that the Chinese system, they don't have to see, you don't have to attend interviews. But the US require interviews. So I think a lot of clarity is still needed for us to draw a conclusion on where the direction of travel in the US seems to look like. But that said, the US has demonstrated now, again, I keep reiterating that there's influence, and the influence it wants to have in Africa will need to shift, at least maybe for the next 2 years. Uh, Maybe another government comes and dismantle everything. Um, that seems to be that seems to be the direction of travel. I will say that I hope they are not wrong, but what I presume is that the future of the world, whether we like it or not, still revolves around Africa. And if China is planning to expand aggressively in Africa, the US seems to be shrinking in Africa. In the next 10 years, the influence will be there. In fact, as of now, the influence is there. If you look at Nigeria, the influence of Chinese is actually way stronger, whether we like to admit it or not. It's stronger than the influence of the US. Although posturing, Nigeria doesn't try to take on, we try to sit in between. But that's in terms of posturing. But in terms of the reality, the economic influence, in terms of the policy influence and all those things, it seems to weigh more towards the Chinese. And so if we are having that across Africa, I'm afraid that the influence of the US in Africa windows down, just like it has done rapidly in Europe, and it's most likely going to happen also in Asia. So the question now remains that where will the US concentrate its policy? Maybe to concentrate it in South America and then the South Hemisphere. God knows that. I mean, my take here is that again, it's a wake up call for African leaders themselves, the leaders. And when I talk about leaders, I'm talking about the thought leaders. I'm not talking just about people sitting in government coffers. We need to begin to shape and shift the narrative around Africa. Um, yeah, we overflog ourselves, just like I said. Oh, we don't have infrastructure, we don't have this one. We need to remember that the Europeans ran Africa for more than 200 years, and we still don't have infrastructure. We've run Africa now for 50 years plus, thereabout, and we still don't have infrastructure. So the question is that 250 years, the European failed in Africa. 50 years, we seem to have failed in Africa. What are the key lessons we are picking from this, and how do we begin to turn the corner? I think that should be at the heart of our policy discourse. That's one. Second thing I will say is that we also need to be extremely careful about our disposition. The visa process of America should not be the only way we assess whether the US have influence or not. Why it mirrors, it shows us just like actuaries, we always say that when you look at the rear view, you could see what is in the future. You don't have to look at when you're driving a car, ideally you are encouraged to look forward. But just like actually, you look at the past and use that to ascertain where the future is going. If you look at the past, anytime you begin to see that shift, that's the beginning. If you look at the collapse of the British Empire, that's how it started also. They started withdrawing their ships that was policing. The British used to be the police of the world. They had their ships, their warships all over the world. When they started withdrawing it, slowly, 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 that's how the empire started. And then the empire started crumbling. And then today, they just have a tiny island, right? So if the US is also following that same trajectory, we don't know where they will land in the next 10 years. And that explains why, for us in Africa, we need to begin to look at how best we can build the next business. How do we leverage emerging technology to begin to accelerate our growth? How do we have, say, a Dangote refinery? I don't like saying refinery because I try to promote the climate. But let's say a Dangote cement plant. How do we have like 50,000 of those across Africa, so that those infrastructure begins to power infrastructure? How do we begin to build businesses? How do we begin to encourage young businesses like we had this boom in Nigeria at some point where we have a lot of fintechs emerging. How do we begin to get those kind of things? How do we put up a culture of entrepreneurship, and not just entrepreneurship to enrich the founder, entrepreneurship whereby resources are actually spreading and eating the core of our society. How do we address the cost of living crisis? How do we elevate the status of our infrastructure? How do we build modern cities across Africa? Cities that can compete and we can be proud of. I can wear a cap and say, oh, I'm proud to come from Lagos. I'm proud to come from, I'm proud to come from Port Harcourt. I'm proud to come from Abeokuta or somewhere like that. When do we get there? How do we get there? That should be in our public discourse today. Unfortunately, uh, we're still roving around the edges, thinking about insecurity, thinking about that second man that cannot eat, and all those basic things. I think we need to address those basic things rapidly and so I think essentially, putting everything together, the most important pillar for us in Africa is we need to look internally. How do we facilitate internally among ourselves such that it becomes so big, and then we woven ourselves together and integrate our economy together. That's the starting point. I think that's where the strength will come from. The second thing is also to shift the narrative away from this support-based master-slave concept that seems to have eluded us since the colonial eras. We need to shift away from that and then begin to aspire. I mean, we can dream big. We can build cities across Africa that can compete with the best cities in the world. I think that should be the direction of travel for Africans. And if we begin to do all those things, begin to build businesses that can challenge the world itself. I don't think the brain that we have is less of the brain that they have anywhere in the world. I think we have smart, very smart people here, and we could reflect. That's reflective also in the kind of sport. You could see it across you. Everywhere you go, you see it around you. So we just have to move away from this lockdown cagey system that we've been operating and then begin to aspire to become as big as we can. I think I will just end here. I will say the unending search for monetary salvation, just like someone will say, is the first thing is to aspire, is to begin to think big. And how do you aspire? Is to dream big. And once you start dreaming big, of course, the world will come to you. You don't have to go to them. Look at China today. The world seems to move around China now. Everything revolves around them. In fact, if the president of America is talking for 2 months and he did not mention China, that conversation is not enough. And so we need to push Africa to that point where we become the centerpiece of the world. And we are not far away from. I think this generation can lay a very solid foundation for the next generation to pick up. And that starts from the thought leadership. It starts from the way we elect our leaders. It starts from the way we think through policies. It starts also from the way we evaluate decisions we are making. And then with that, we can begin to shift things. If we can do that, I think we could solve a lot of problems.
Thank you very much, Samuel, for joining us on the podcast. It's always a pleasure, and I truly say that it's always a pleasure engaging with you because I get to learn a lot of economic
Always for having me on the
facts.
podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much to all our
Yeah,
listeners.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. To all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, like, and share this link so that your friends and family can learn about the podcast as well. We would like to also know your thoughts in the comment section. So share your thoughts on the conversations that we had today. For deeper insights into our work, you can visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember, you can always connect with us on all our social media platforms. We are on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you for tuning in to the week ahead. Join us in 2 weeks for more updates that are shaping the African continent.